Good morning, everyone. Folks, another minute here to get logged in.
Jeremy, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I had trouble getting in, so I didn't know if I was partially in or completely or not in or whatever. All right, thanks.
You were here and accounted for.
Great. I was hoping I was going to get an hour and blame it on technology.
That's such luck. Soraya, would you be so kind as to put our instructions up for virtual meetings? Looks like, is that Bella helping us today?
Yes, it is. My first time going.
Okay, welcome. So this is our May meeting of the Technical Transportation Advisory Committee. We are continuing to meet virtually. If you are watching from home, you can raise your hand to request an opportunity to speak. Or if you're calling in by phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute. So we'll go ahead and take roll. Bella, if you have a list, would you mind calling roll for me? Is that, Bella, do you have that available or do you want me?
I was having microphone issues.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have Shane Stack, Sarah Cofield.
So Shane's here.
Oh, perfect.
This is Ben Schmidt for Sarah Cofield.
Thank you. Corey Aldridge,
Here.
Ellen Buchanan,
Present.
Aaron Pehan, Jacqueline Smith,
Here.
Chet Krauser.
Karen Hughes for Chet Krauser.
Thank you. Juniper Davis,
Present.
Donna Galker.
Grant Carlton for Donna Gockler.
Thank you. Ryan Hannon,
Present.
Lynn Hellegard,
Present.
Jeremy Keene,
Present.
Ben Weiss,
Here.
Tiffany Brander,
Present.
Brian Elstad,
Present.
Bynum Jackson, Eva Rock, Katie Potts,
This is Vicky Cernich for Katie Potts.
thank you, and Emily Brock.
Present.
All right, that's all for roll call.
Very good. Thank you, Bella. Appreciate that. We have approval of minutes from our April 1st meeting. Or edits to the minutes for April 1st. Okay, seeing none, those will stand approved. Next item is public comment. Any public comment on items that are not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our new business. We have 2 items today. The first item is presentation and overview of the draft long-range transportation plan. Aaron Wilson and Jennifer Weiland.
All right, well, hopefully, thanks Jeremy for the intro. Hopefully you all are not getting sick of seeing us here to present on the long-range transportation plan. As always with COVID and these virtual meetings, where I don't know whether it's fortunate or not to be able to have Jennifer here and have monthly updates, but I think it has been helpful to keep the committees informed and keep this project moving along on schedule. So we're here with I guess what would be hopefully the penultimate presentation on the long range transportation plan. We're really excited to have the draft out for public review, and so I think this is where we start to culminate with all of the hard work that everyone has done, all of the feedback that you all have given us, and put it into a form that actually brings all of that together. So I'm excited to present it and see what you all think of it, and go through just some of the highlights of the plan today, and get some preliminary feedback, and then set the stage for getting this plan to adoption next month and wrapping up this phase of the long range plan. And then we go into probably the more difficult part of implementing the vision that we've laid out. So just a quick couple of housekeeping. So Jennifer will lead us off on the presentation, but we are in our public comment period, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. But we have a 3-week public comment period on the draft plan, and then we'll take all of those comments, do some revisions, and we'll be back next month with sort of a final draft for a recommendation to adopt. Obviously, after that 3-week period, we still have to come back to you and go to TPCC for adoption. So there's some additional time for comments as they come in, but we're hoping to have the bulk of anything substantive by May 21st, so that we have some time to refine and make those changes and get the draft ready for all of you to review ahead of TTAC in June. So just a little bit of that housekeeping in terms of where we're going. But with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jennifer to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you again. We are not going to spend too much time in presentation today because, as Aaron mentioned, you've really seen all the elements of the draft plan over the course of our time together developing it. So what Aaron and I thought we would do is just highlight a few of the sections that we've spent less time as a committee discussing, and then we also will likely pull over the draft plan to the screen and kind of use that as a way to orient you to a few of the sections that would really benefit from your review, especially because they're a little bit newer in terms of what you've seen so far. So I will share my screen to get us started, and again, just take a few minutes to run through a couple of slides here. So if you've had a chance to take a look at the draft plan, these are a few of the things that you are going to see as you go through. So the plan is broken down into 10 chapters, and the first 5 of those chapters really set the stage. So it talks a little bit about how we got here, why the long range plan has been developed, what did we hear from the public over the course of the plan, and then really gets us to the scenarios. So essentially a lot of what we spent 2020 developing. And then the last 5 chapters of the plan focus in on the recommendations. So the recommended scenario and the near, medium, and long-term projects, the programs and policies, the funding and performance measures, as well as some near-term actions. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time today focused on the programs and policies, but really performance measures and near-term actions, since those are the 2 chapters of the plan that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about. Throughout the plan, you all are very familiar with the goals. You were key in helping to establish those. Hopefully you see the goals woven in through the recommendations and then of course in the performance measures, but they did really guide everything that we've done through the course of the draft plan. We've been using our evaluation framework, of course, to get to the point of having our recommendations. And so that has been key as we moved into the scenario development, used our analysis metrics that were tied back to the goals, and then ultimately came out with 71 capital projects that are part of the recommended scenario and nearly 100 more that are part of the illustrative project list. We do have 27 programs and policies that are recommended. Some of those are programs and policies that are ongoing with work that you already have underway at the city or county. Others of them are new and provide opportunities to really build on the capital projects that are recommended through the long range plan. The performance measures, again, are tied directly to the goals. There are 28 performance measures that do a couple of things. They maintain consistency with the federal and state requirements for performance measures, but then also offer an opportunity to go a little bit beyond that and to measure other elements of the goals that you've set through Missoula Connect. And then the very last chapter is the near-term actions, and we've identified 12 near-term actions that span programs, policies, and projects to help think about the ways that the MPO could partner with the city, with the county, with other entities to be able to advance a few of the higher priority recommendations more quickly. So as you dive into the plan, you will see again, those first 5 chapters are really about the current context. So what happened in 2020? What do we know about existing conditions and what has changed? Especially a bit of a focus on the importance of transit in creating a more affordable region, the challenges with growth that the region is experiencing, and then of course what we heard from the public to shape the goals that are set in the plan. So those first 5 chapters, as you look at them, should feel really familiar to you. Then as we move into chapter 6, that's where we start getting into the recommended scenario. So again, the recommended scenario is a place that we've spent a good amount of time with TTAC, with the public, and also with TPCC. You'll see that the projects are broken down into 6 different categories, with our complete streets projects that usually include improvements for all modes of transportation, what we're calling our urban active transportation improvements, which you can really think about as sort of a variety of different on-street facilities, whether those are sidewalks, on-street bike lanes, protected bike lanes, or greenways, neighborhood greenways. And then our shared use paths and trail connections, which sometimes are in the right of way and other times are not, are using other types of infrastructure to provide connections for people. The safety improvements and enhanced crossings, again, pretty intersection focused, but very much about multimodal operations and connections. The roadway extensions are the handful of brand new connections that are being made. Those are almost always complete streets connections as well, but we do call them out as a separate category in the plan just because it is a brand new facility. And then of course, bridge and crossing improvements, which are called out separately. So the reason, I know you all are familiar with these projects, but part of the reason I wanted to highlight them on this slide is just that the color that you see represented here for each of the types of projects is a theme that carries you all the way through chapter 6. So for folks who are particularly interested in just focusing on the roadway extension projects, you're going to look for the projects that are in blue across all of the different phases of implementation. We do, again, maintain the near, medium, and long-term time frames for different projects, and that's something we talked about a couple of meetings ago. And as I mentioned, we have 71 projects that are ultimately included within the fiscally constrained recommended scenario. So you can see the mix of projects here. Again, a lot of focus on complete streets and active transportation projects. To really ensure that we're advancing the goals that are set in Missoula Connect and helping to move toward the ambitious mode share targets that you set previously and that we maintained through this plan. Just another quick look at the graphic approach here. So in chapter 6, you will see that you've got 4 different maps, one that shows you the near-term projects, one for the medium term, another for the long term, and then another for the illustrative projects, so that those are really front and center and not just relegated to an appendix. We provide information in the body of the plan about the total project cost for each of the projects that is included, especially in the recommended scenario. And what I want to note about that for all of you that are looking at those costs is that we did intentionally include the total cost versus the plan cost, at least in chapter 6. And when you go to the appendix that provides a little bit more detail about each of the projects, that's where you'll see the breakdown between the cost that comes from the discretionary funds in Missoula Connect versus the total cost. So again, we've got 22 near-term projects. These are the highest priority for the first 5 years, and really focus in on completing work that you already have underway, advancing some of those committed projects, and then starting to build out more of the neighborhood greenway, as well as a couple of the really key projects like the Front and Main 2A conversion. To complement all of those maps and project lists in chapter 6, you'll see a handful of project spotlights. And we've got spotlights for really each phase of different type of projects. So we have a near-term spotlight, we've got medium-term spotlights, as well as long-term. And the intent here was to really highlight a few of the areas, for example, where there is a lot of focus, there are a lot of projects going on. The Reserve Street area projects are just one example of that. Some of the spotlights focus in on a particular project. So a crossing project, for example, or again, Front Main 2A conversion is another one that has its own spotlight. So we tried to use these to really provide a little bit more context about the projects and help describe what they do in terms of advancing the region's goals. And you'll see for each of them that we share information about the phase of the project. So these Reserve Street projects are largely in the near term and medium term, as well as provide a little bit of information about the types of projects that are recommended. Chapter 7 then, so this is one where as you review, seeing all of this content written down, this is probably going to be the first time that you've reviewed it in great detail. We've talked in past meetings about the importance of programs and policies. We've highlighted a few of these that we felt were going to be really important for the plan. And what we've built out in the draft plan is, again, for each of these 20-some programs and policies, we talk a little bit about what it is, why it matters, what's the first step that needs to be taken, who are the key partners, or who is the key partner for the MPO in advancing any of these. And then again, what is the relative priority compared to the other programs and policies? You'll see, as I mentioned, that many of them are ongoing. You've already got some of this work underway, and what we tried to do was identify what else could be added for some of these. There is an element of discretionary funding that is allocated toward programs and policies as part of the long-range plan. But I will just note for full transparency that being able to fully implement what is identified here as recommended is not within the fiscally constrained list. So these recommended programs and policies do have some dedicated funding, but likely would take more than what is currently available. Similar to the approach that we took with the projects, we do have spotlights throughout the recommended programs and policies. We tried to choose, again, kind of a mix here, some that are really more programmatic in terms of how the city and county and region, for example, think about growth. What are all of the elements involved in encouraging compact growth? These, again, are not necessarily things that are within the MPO's sphere of responsibility, but certainly when we think about the ability to advance toward the Missoula Connect goals and meet the mode share targets, thinking very carefully as a region about continuing to encourage compact growth and the policies and programs that are needed to do that is an important piece of being able to make Missoula Connect work. So again, you'll see a mix of different types of spotlights, some more specific, and then others that are a bit more general like this one. Funding, we've talked a lot about in our last couple of meetings. Nothing has changed materially in terms of the total revenues that we're estimating, the amount of discretionary funding that is available to program through the long-range plan, or really the overall mix. You can see in this graphic that when we look at how funding is allocated across the different types of projects, we do have over 50% of the discretionary funding that is programmed to complete streets projects. So again, projects that help to make important connections and work for people traveling by all modes, whether you're driving, taking the bus, walking, biking, or rolling. You can also see that there is a really significant investment in this plan toward active transportation projects, and that includes both on-street and off-street facilities like trails, but about 20% of the discretionary funding is programmed for active transportation projects. So of those 71 projects, again, we had about $208 million in discretionary funding that is programmed for those projects. And then have, again, a couple of $1 million, about $2.5 million of discretionary funds that can help to support the programs and policies that are in Chapter 7. So Chapter 8 is all about funding the plan. You'll also see the other types of funding sources that we talked about at our last meeting included in Chapter 8 as considerations for the future. And then Chapter 9, again, is where we get to performance measures. So Chapter 9 is all about how we measure success. We do, again, reiterate the mode share targets that were set in the 2016 long range plan. As we discussed pretty early on with TTAC and with TPCC, we were maintaining those targets as we headed into this long range plan update. And then for each of the 5 Missoula Connect goals, you will see that we have established measures that tie back to the evaluation framework. So a lot of this should feel really consistent with the criteria that we use to help determine the projects we wanted to move forward. And then for each of those measures, we've established specific metrics that can then be tracked either on an annual basis or sometimes at a slightly different time frame. Rather than establishing numeric targets for every one of the metrics, we've indicated a target direction. So one of the important things that we can do as we move forward is get really clear about what the baseline is for each of these metrics so that as you track these metrics on an annual basis, you know where you've started from in 2021 and can really see how the investments that you're making through implementing Missoula Connect help to move in the right direction. You will see for many of the metrics, or not many, but a good handful of the metrics that are included, you'll see a little federal highways symbol next to them. I unfortunately didn't choose a graphic that included that, but those really indicate the metrics that tie directly to the state and federal targets. There is also an appendix that talks specifically about the consistency with the state targets. And of course, the MPO supports the state targets and tracks them through the Transportation Improvement Program as well. You know, one of the things that could be interesting to think about as a region in terms of how you do your annual reporting is thinking about ways to create more interactive dashboards, something that is web-based that could be updated a lot more easily than always having something that is a printed report that you have to produce each year. So lots of different ways to use these metrics, but we tried to stick with data that we knew was readily available. There are some metrics that will require a new calculation, but we essentially have set those up through the evaluation process that's been done for the plan. So it should be really easy for you all to replicate as you move forward. And then again, the last chapter before the conclusion is just about taking the next steps. So what are 12 key actions to move forward now? Again, these are actions that aren't fully the MPO's responsibility. They all require partnerships. They all require coordination. But they do span from being able to advance the Higgins Avenue corridor plan to thinking about advancing the idea of mobility hubs, thinking about how to continue partnering to bring passenger rail back to the region. This chapter also includes a few of Mountain Line's near-term priorities as well as a few of MDT's near-term priorities. So we wanted to highlight some of the things that if you're only able to focus on 12 things over the next 2 to 3 years, this gives you a place to start. And then, so I'll let Aaron talk more about schedule and how to review, but that is the quick overview of what's included in the plan. Aaron, do you want to talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of the review process first, and then we can flip through anything else that people want to see?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our review process, we've set a sort of open public comment period through May 21st. Gives 3 weeks for people to review the plan and provide comments and get any feedback to us, and then we can have a week or so to take that feedback and make sure that we have a final draft that incorporates any changes, within at least a week ahead of the next TTAC meeting, so you all have a chance to read through and review that final plan before you're asked to make a recommendation for adoption to TPCC. So we have a couple of ways that we can provide feedback, and maybe I will share my screen. So obviously we can take sort of standard process where you can email us your comments in an email or a spreadsheet or a marked up PDF. But we also are testing out a new tool that allows for directly commenting onto the draft plan via our website. So I'm going to share my screen and just walk through. Can you all see this okay?
Yep.
Great. So on our website, on the long range transportation plan page, we have just some overview of that schedule and some basic details. There's a link to a downloadable PDF if you want to print it. I know I always like to have at least one printed copy that I can review because I catch things differently on print than I would on a screen. But for reviewing the plan and going through it, we have this embedded viewer and comment tool that I think will hopefully simplify going through the plan. And it allows you to, the most critical part of this is it allows you to add comments directly to the plan by just clicking and putting your name, email if you want, comments, type of comments. So you can leave ideas, suggestions, typos, or questions. When someone leaves a question in the plan, we can go in and provide an official response. So you can also reply to other people's comments, but as far as responding to an actual question, we can provide sort of the official MPO or project team response. And so it gives a little bit of flexibility of type of comments. And it's just really easy as you're scrolling through this plan. If there's a point you want to make a comment on, you just click and put a comment on. So it's very similar to the interactive mapping tools that we've used where people can comment on maps and respond to other people's comments and interact a little bit in the draft plan. There are also, we have a table of contents that takes you immediately to the table of contents, and then you can click on a specific chapter and it will take you to the start. And so you can pick up either where you left off, or if you just want to review a specific chapter, say you want to go just review our recommended programs and policies, you don't have to scroll through a full PDF and try to get to that page. You can use this table of contents tool to get there. And then for the public, we have a couple of other things. We have a really kind of brief guided tour, just some highlights that will help walk people through the draft plan. And so it takes you to specific chapters and pages and allows people to sort of get that initial quick overview of what's in the plan and what we're looking for as they get started reviewing. And then finally, we have an embedded interactive map that has all of the projects that you can explore and get more detail. So if you're reading the project chapter and you want to really dive in and look at a specific project that you can't quite get the detail you want on the printed page, we have this interactive map where you can go in and see in a little bit more detail. So this should be a familiar tool. We've been using this sort of all along in our recommended projects. So that's probably the easiest way to provide comments. I think for folks on this committee, if you're reviewing and you have more detailed responses, you can obviously email us or provide those comments in whatever way works. But this is something that, if you want to pass along to other folks or staff within your department and just collect all of the comments in one place, this is a way that we can do that. And so at the end of that public comment period, we'll be able to download all of this in one place. We'll have all of those comments and we'll be able to display those and respond to them, I think, really effectively. And hopefully it will help focus people as people are reading the plan and commenting, that they will be focused and putting comments specifically. We'll know exactly what they're referencing. So really interested to see how well this works. I think it's a tool we can continue to use if it seems to be effective and works well for people. So that's kind of an overview of how we're collecting comments. And then as I mentioned at the beginning, the rest of our process as we come into June, we will have our final draft with any comments for you to essentially hopefully recommend adoption, and then we'll bring that to TPCC. And so we can take comments up until TPCC on the 15th, but it gets increasingly harder to make substantial changes the closer we get. And so we're hoping that you all can do your primary review in this 3-week comment period and get us comments by the 21st. So I think that's all I have on process. Are there any questions, or if anyone wants to go talk about specific elements of the plan? I'll just say that I'm really excited with how this plan is turning out. I think it has a flow and a graphic element to it that we haven't necessarily had in the past. And so, the detail is there if you want it, but if you also just want to flip through and get sort of the highlights, I think it's really easy to do that. And those graphic elements to it help sort of pop out sort of the key points at key stages throughout the document. And so I think Jennifer and her team have done a really fantastic job pulling all of this together, and I'm excited. So I'm curious to know what other folks think.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Jennifer. We'll open it up to questions here. I'll just start with if we have some time to maybe go into a little bit more depth on the performance measures, I'd be interested to hear more about those. Being this is the technical advisory committee, I think it would be nice to understand how we would be using those in the future.
We can definitely do that. Jeremy, should we see if there are questions first and then?
Yeah, it looks like Ben has a question. Why don't you go ahead, Ben?
Thanks. Yeah, this is maybe a less technical question. I think the plan looks great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, from a readability perspective and good information in fun graphic form that I think you can flip through it really easily and glean a lot and find what you're looking for pretty easily. One of the things I noticed, there was a story, a couple media stories about a recent presentation on this that I think the headline is like heavy on non-motorized, light on funding is the headline. And it's generated then, hostile comments on social media and stuff. And I just want to point out that 70% of the funding is still going to roadway projects. So while I think it's great that we have our complete streets policy helps non-motorized, and I think that our focus on greenways is wonderful. There still is this perception that we're kind of only putting our funding into non-motorized projects, and that's just frankly not true. And so I just wanted to kind of state that for the record. And yeah, thank you again for your work on this. If you have any suggestions on ways to combat that sort of categorization of this plan, that might be helpful and worth looking into for a final draft.
Thanks for that, Ben. That is helpful to just sort of know that is part of the perception. I think the point you made is a really good one. If we think about the investments in complete streets, in roadway extensions, in the safety improvements and in the bridge improvements, all of those projects have benefits for people traveling by all modes, right? Those are not projects that benefit just one mode or another. They certainly do as much for people driving as they do for people traveling by any other mode. And so maybe there's a little bit better story we can tell around that. And quite frankly, I would say that active transportation projects benefit people who are driving as well, because they provide dedicated space for people who are using other modes besides driving, and that helps with right-of-way allocation. It improves safety. So I think it's fair to say that there are benefits for folks traveling by all modes, regardless of project type. I would say that the characterization that the plan is light on funding is fair enough. There is not enough discretionary funding to be able to do anywhere near everything that is needed, and you all know that, and that is part of the reality of transportation funding. And so I think that is an important conversation to keep having regionally, but appreciate the idea of being able to tell the story of what is funded in a little bit of a different way. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I did a quick calculation. If you look at our dedicated standalone active transportation projects as a component of our full plan, our full budget of 1.3 billion, it's like 3%. And so when you take into account maintenance and transit and capital projects and all of those other things, dedicated active transportation projects like bike lanes and shared use paths are a really small component of our overall spending on transportation. And so I think that aspect of the headline is, I don't know how it's sort of how things have been portrayed throughout this project. And it's a good point that we can continue to communicate what our strategy is and why it will be helpful for the region.
I think it's also important to recognize that the non-motorized active transportation projects and roadway projects are not mutually exclusive in terms of benefit. So when we invest in non-motorized to achieve those mode split goals, we're providing more capacity for cars on the roads as well. And because of our funding constraints, our ability to add more lanes is very limited. But if we can shift a certain number of our users to non-motorized and other modes, we've added more capacity. So I think those two things have to be talked about together as well.
Yep, agreed.
Should we take a look at performance measures, Jeremy, or do you see other hands?
Yeah, I don't see anybody else with their hand up, so why don't we talk about performance measures a little bit more?
All right, I'll just pull up the draft plan as a way to do this and jump right down to measuring success. So I'll keep this hopefully so we can, let's see here, view. Let's go full screen. That'll help a little bit. All right. So maybe let's jump here to a couple of these. And I guess, Jeremy, what would maybe be most helpful? Do you want me to choose a handful of these to highlight and talk about how we might track them or the relationship to federal highway and state targets? I don't want to walk you through 28 performance measures because you'll get real bored.
I'm not sure. I guess if you could highlight some of the things that we haven't done in the past, maybe for
Sure.
performance measures.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, great. So again, we'll just kind of start with a quick overview of what is included here. You can see, so this first goal that is focused on safety, again, we did orient the performance measures around the 5 goals. And as I mentioned, you'll see on some of them the little federal highways symbol, which indicates the connection to the federal targets. And again, federal targets for those who are listening in on the phone really do focus on safety, infrastructure condition, reliability, and emissions. So part of what you'll see in the Missoula Connect performance targets is that we're going beyond those 4 things and really trying to capture the other elements of what's included in the goals. So any of those that have the federal highway symbol are things that you all have tracked before. You've been required to do that for a long time. I think that a couple of things that I would note, even as we look at this first goal in terms of what's new, really continuing the focus on not just counting things, but thinking about the ways that the projects and the infrastructure you build help to translate to different outcomes is part of what we tried to focus on with the metrics. So a few of these that you'll see really are about counting. How many miles of bike facilities are constructed? How many blocks of sidewalk are constructed? But then also trying to make the connection with what we're building to the areas of focus for the region. And so really being able to advance the equity and sustainability goals as well. So an example is thinking, yes, this one is about counting the number of projects completed in specific areas, but really want to be tracking what you're building in the Invest Health neighborhoods or in low to moderate income census tracts. So that element of thinking really specifically about the areas is a little bit different. Another area I'd say where there are measures that might feel a little bit different than some of what you have tracked in the past would be especially around goal 4, which is focused on connecting and strengthening communities. This is a goal that doesn't have targets that tie as directly to the federal requirements, but this is a place where, for example, being able to track what is hopefully a decrease in average household housing and transportation costs, that combined household and transportation cost, is an important element of being able to achieve the affordability goals that are set out in the plan. So that's one example of something that is a little bit different and maybe goes beyond what has been done before. We also really tried to focus in on some of the connections to important destinations. So beyond just the projects, really thinking about projects that are within a walk or bike shed or a transit ride of specific destinations. And again, thinking about percent of households with direct transit connections to job centers. This is one of those metrics that you can't just immediately pull the data. It requires a little bit of analysis. But again, this is something that we set up through the scenario evaluation process, and so will be easy for the region to do moving forward. But we want to be able to see that more and more households have direct transit connections to job centers as the region grows. This is part of inward growth. It's also part of building out the transit system and then ensuring safe walking, biking, and driving connections to transit stops and centers. So that's one that in particular feels a little bit different. I would say also, being really thoughtful about, for example, I'll go over here to goal number 3. So projects that, in thinking about freight and transit movement, projects that really close a gap to connect to a transit stop or station. So this is a way to really build out our multimodal thinking as we track projects, so that it's not just about building a piece of sidewalk, for example, that doesn't really connect to anything, but really focusing on the ways that we are building projects that help to complete the system. So maybe those are a few examples. Erin, what else jumps out to you as kind of newer elements of performance measurement?
Well, I was just thinking that one of the areas I think it would be helpful to get feedback, particularly from members of this committee, is thinking about how these performance measures relate to other plans and policies, and ways that we can sort of not constantly be duplicating data or efforts across different plans, but start to use shared metrics that might be part of the long range plan, but also part of some other plans, like our climate action plans or our housing affordability, or some of these other things where we can either collaborate on those performance measures, or just show how these plans are related in a way that is not just, here's our plan and our goals, but here are the outcomes we're working towards, and how we can measure sort of joint success on those. And so that, I think, would be an area, as you're reviewing this chapter, to really think about what sorts of performance measures you might be using in your own plans or in other kinds of settings, and where we can make sure we have good overlap and connectivity between our plans, so that we're ultimately all working towards the same common goals in these sort of increasingly complicated and challenging systems.
So you mentioned before annual reporting. Is this a tool that we would use more on a comprehensive basis rather than an individual project basis to evaluate how we're doing? And does the plan provide some kind of a baseline for where we are today?
We have not set baselines for all of these, but we certainly could. The data exists to do that. And yeah, Jeremy, you're right. These are really intended to help understand how, at a system level, the improvements that you're making at the city, at the county, and across the region start to advance toward the goals. But honestly, these metrics tie back. Part of what we tried to be really intentional about is tying these metrics back to the evaluation framework that we used for the long range plan. And so any of the projects that are part of the recommended scenario already were evaluated based on their contribution toward these metrics. So you could say that we have evaluated each of the recommended projects to make sure that they are going to move us in the right direction in terms of the targets that are set here. So you could do it on a project basis, but they are intended to be more system level metrics. And then yes, the baseline data is available for all of these. It doesn't necessarily live in the plan right now, but that is something that if you're going to create an online dashboard, for example, would be a pretty easy thing to do. And Aaron, I really like the way that you framed up the request for the committee around reviewing. So if you see a metric in here and you think, wow, we're already tracking something that is really similar to that, let's adjust it, or there is something that we're tracking that actually works better than what's here, that kind of feedback would be really helpful so that, as Aaron said, you're not trying to track things that are very, very similar across 20 different plans.
Okay, well, other questions or comments from the committee? Well, it's a really good looking plan. There's a lot of great information in there. I hope folks will take the time to read through it and make some comments before the 21st. It really is important for the way that we move forward in programming projects and actually starting to work on these things. So appreciate your work on this, and look forward to seeing the final plan. David Gray.
Hi, everybody. Dave Gray, MPO Transportation Planner. And when I appreciate this discussion on the performance measures, as you go through them, think about the ways that we're going to actually get to the bottom of some of those measures, because we've got the Community Transportation Safety Plan, which looks at injuries and property damage, but it doesn't get to near misses. It doesn't get to a level of detail that some people may prefer. And then when we look at freight, we have never had any kind of broad freight inclusion or even interest. So if you know of anybody that could help with freight and how we might be able to evaluate truck size, roundabout radius, things like that, it's going to be difficult for us to, as the MPO, to go through these performance measures without absolute cooperation by other people that have their feet on the ground. And so if, as you look through them, yeah, please suggest sources, because we as the MPO can't do it all by ourselves. So thank you.
Thanks, David. Ellen.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is like year 17 of doing these things, and this process has been so far superior to any of the long-range transportation plan updates that I've been involved in, and some of them were really painful back in the old days. So kudos to Aaron and your team, and Jennifer and your team. You guys have made this really easy. We were looking at another long-range transportation plan update. I'm giving serious consideration to whether I really want to be on TTAC still. So I'm still here. It's been a great process. I think we have a great set of projects, and we just need to be our usual creative Missoula self and cobble together the money to get the important ones done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ellen.
You're here for the next 4-year update, Ellen.
Oh, God help us all. Well, the mayor's running again, so we'll see how that works out. I have this little commitment going on with him. If he's there, I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other hands. Should we move on to our next agenda item?
Thank you all. Happy reviewing.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, our next item is to review and recommend TPCC support for city and county transportation alternative grant applications. Charlie Menifee.
Hello, this is Charlie and John from the MPO here. Share my screen. Get this presentation. Can you all hear us okay?
Sure can.
Awesome. So we have a list of transportation alternative grant submittals for the city and county, and we will be talking through those right now. So the Transportation Alternatives Grant Program is funded through the Surface Transportation Block Grant Set-Aside Funds as a replacement to the previous MAP 21 Transportation Alternatives Program. This grant has two separate applications for capital improvement projects. That's a total of $5.5 million available funds, as well as the pavement preservation projects, which has $1 million in available funds. And the applications are due just under a month now. So our focus today is to introduce the Lolo School Sidewalk Roadway Improvements Project. And then we're going to go into more depth on the Eaton Street Pedestrian Improvements Project Phase 1 and South Avenue connections. And then I'm just going to touch on right here that there are two pavement preservation applications that are to be determined and are in the works. One would be through the city and county on trail maintenance, and one potentially through Parks and Recreation. So they're determining which sections of trail they would like to submit funding requests for. The first is the Lolo School Sidewalk Roadway Improvement Project. And this is about a half mile of roadway and sidewalk improvement to occur on Lewis and Clark Drive and Farm Lane in Lolo. The funding request is approximately $1 million, and this is part of the current long-range transportation plan project list as an illustrative project. Next project is Eaton Street pedestrian improvements. And we have decided to go with a phased approach with this project because it's quite a significant undertaking. And the first limits are from 7th Street to South 14th Street. So that's highlighted here in blue. And then the entire limits extend down to South Avenue. So that includes the blue and the green sections. This project currently has $1.5 million in committed CIP funds. And our request for this first phase is still to be determined. The initial approximation for the entire phase was just under $900,000. So we're thinking around half of that is what the phase request will be. We think this is a really significant and important project because both phases are missing huge sidewalk sections. It is a local collector, so the road has quite high volumes, and from my understanding, it is used oftentimes during high traffic times on Reserve Street. The first phase, so from 7th Street to Mount and 14th intersection, is along a transit route. So it'd be great to improve the facilities along there for transit riders. And in our 2018 pedestrian facilities master plan, this area, Franklin to the Fort neighborhood, as well as Eaton Street, was determined to be in the highest level of needs areas. This project is also part of the long-range transportation plan project list. So this project will include filling the sidewalk gaps along the corridor. It'll also have ADA fixtures at intersections, alleyway crossings, and driveways, At intersections, it'll include domed ADA fixtures, and at alleyway crossings, it will be improved grades. There will also be an intersection improvement at Eaton Street, South 14th, and Mount Avenue, and the design of that is yet to be determined. This summer, and the city's engineering section will be putting out an RFP to have further engineering work done on this project. I'm gonna hand this off to John here.
So the Eaton Street corridor has a varying right of way from 60 feet to 50 feet. So this is a typical section where you have a 60-foot right of way, 2 driving lanes that are 10 feet wide, 7 feet parking lanes, a curb with a 7-foot boulevard and a 5-foot sidewalk. So this is an example where we also have 60-foot right of way. However, there are parts of the corridor where there are topography constraints. There's irrigation ditches. We'll have some pictures of those we'll show here in a second. But here, 60-foot right of way, so the boulevard is eliminated and there'll be a curbside sidewalk. And also in sections, parking will be eliminated to make sure everything fits in with those constrained areas. And where there's a 50-foot right of way, parking will be retained, but there'll be 2 curbside sidewalks on the west and east side of the street. And here is an example of where there is an irrigation ditch, and so the sidewalk is curbside, and then it goes to a boulevard sidewalk where the right of way, where there's no constraint and fits in within that 60-foot right of way. The bottom picture is an example of where there'd most likely be a curbside sidewalk on the left, and then depending on the right of way width on the right, there'd either be a boulevard sidewalk or a curbside sidewalk. Here is a picture of a newly installed bridge over the irrigation canal at Eaton and Spurgeon. So just another example of improvements that have been made along this corridor, and just another project justification to fill in these missing sidewalk gaps. So the next project we want to brief you on today is the South Avenue Connections and Safety Improvement Projects. This is an area map of the project location. So it's South Avenue west of Reserve Street out towards Big Sky High School. This is as you can see, community medical center is here. There's 2 schools, a lot of other services, and with the development of Fort Missoula Regional Park, this is a really important project to address. So TA applications for this project were submitted in 2015 and 2017. Those were unsuccessful. However, the engineering department has consulted with WGM Group, and there is now a 60% design for that project, which will put us in a much better position for this round of applications. So project elements include a mile of sidewalk on the north side of South Avenue. There's currently a shared use path along the south, and then in addition, a bike lane. And then crossing improvements across South Avenue at Old Fort Road, Big Sky High School, and the regional park. And this project is also part of the LRTP. So here's a little more detail of where project elements are. And then along the bottom, you can see typical cross sections where you have a new bike lane, boulevard, and a sidewalk. And here are some site pictures. The top one is right across the street from the fire station, just west of the traffic light. You can see there is a need for improvements along this corridor to improve safety for all all modes of travel. Often there will be a car turning left and cars will go into the shoulder to pass them, which is where bikers often are. So something that we'd like to address. And then this bottom picture is at the intersection by Big Sky High School. And you can see there's also transit service along this corridor. So a complete streets or sidewalk improvement and bike lanes would be really beneficial here. So we just want to open it up for questions and discussions at this point. We would like to ask for approval of to support TPCC and providing letters of support for all these applications. Thank you.
Ben, go ahead.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, John and Charlie. I just want to let TTAC know that these projects were selected by, in consultation with Jeremy and Kevin, myself, Aaron, looking at the city's CIP priorities, looking at our planning documents, and we feel really good about these projects. And these are city, the two, South Avenue and Eaton Street, are city projects. Charlie and John from the MPO are helping out with the completion of the application because they're able to tie a lot of moving parts together on our behalf, and we're real grateful. But if we're successful in these, we anticipate these being city managed and city led projects. And so, yeah, we're happy for the help. Thanks, MPO folks.
Helen.
Yeah, I'm sure I missed this, but what is the south boundary of the Eaton Street project? What street?
So on the map, it showed it going all the way to South Avenue. However, we do recognize that the URD did make improvements up to Sussex. And so we just showed that whole scope to make sure that down to south, to make sure that the new improvements tie into the URD improvements.
Okay, thank you.
And that would be for phase 2. So our phase 1 limits are from 7th to the 14th in Mount Avenue intersection. But as an entire project, it continues down to South Avenue.
But you're only requesting funding for phase 1 in this application?
Yes.
Thank you.
Charlie, could you go back to South Avenue? Do we have an amount that we're requesting on South Avenue, and is it for the whole project, or are we also looking at a phase?
Yes, so I'm going to share my screen just to bring that map back up for us. We are requesting for phase 1, and this is because we had engineering provide us with an estimation for the entire project limit. And we thought that the total cost request to match with the available 1.5 CIP funds might make receiving our request less realistic. So they are rerunning values for the first phase, and our current projection would be that it would be half or roughly half of that initial $900,000 estimate to request.
Sorry, so that's for Eaton or South Avenue?
Oh, my apologies. South Avenue, we do not have a current estimation, but we are asking for the entire project.
Previously, I believe our 2017 grant application, we asked for somewhere in the neighborhood of 900,000 for this one. We expect this to be another large ask, although some of the newer information that we have by having a consultant on board, a consultant engineer on board, is that we're going to have better breakdowns of what the expenses are and where we can directly apply TA funding. our ask last time around, just because we weren't as far along, was kind of convoluted. We were asking for TA to pay for the sidewalk on the north side of the street only, and that saying that we were going to do the rest, but we didn't have the right of way or the alignment or know what exactly that would look like. This time we're going to have a lot more known about that, and so I think that we're going to be able to make a clearer, more strategic ask to help fund a portion of this project. But we don't know exactly what that ask is going to be yet until we get with engineering and review some of these 60% drawings and cost estimates.
But the TA ask would be to make up the gap between what we've already programmed in our CIP and what the total project cost would be.
Potentially. I don't even know that I think that our CIP included some grant funding for this, and so we'll look back at that before landing on a number.
Yeah, if I remember right, we were looking for order of magnitude $1 million to make up that gap.
Yeah.
What's the total project cost?
I don't know that we know yet, but this is about a mile of roadway. 3-lane complete street is typically in the 3 to 4 million range. Is that right?
Used to be.
I think our CIP estimate is about 4 to 4.5 million for this whole project.
Okay, so it's now 5 plus.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, okay. And we're only asking for probably between 1 and 2 million, or 1 million, somewhere around $1 million in TA money.
Yeah, probably a little bit less. This one is also able to split into phases, and I think the first phase is reserved to community, and so that's something that we're going to look at closer. When again, I think that engineering just got the 60% design drawings earlier this week, so we haven't had a chance to really look at them yet.
And I believe TA has a maximum ask of it's either $1 million or a total, or it's in that $1 million to $1.5 million as the maximum you can request out of TA for a project.
I think it's $1 million, Aaron.
What's that?
I think it's $1 million.
Yep, that sounds right to me.
So if I could make one suggestion and then I'll shut up. I know it doesn't make sense when you're looking at an aerial or a map or even being logical, but I would suggest phase 1 might be more competitive if it's the other end of this project, because it addresses park, it addresses high school, it addresses a lot of potential, if not already existing, pedestrian activity that doesn't necessarily happen around community. And then once they funded that piece of it, they're probably more likely to go ahead and fund the connector back to reserve.
That's a good suggestion, Ellen. And one, I know that the original phasing of this was going to work from west to east. I think that some of the congestion and safety issues around Old Fort Road and, kind of between reserve and the hospital led engineering to kind of switch that phasing order. But when I don't know that we actually contemplated that in terms of strategy of TA. And so that's a new wrinkle that we'll certainly bring back and discuss.
I would say one approach is an engineering approach, and the other one is a how's it really used by people approach. Just off the top of my head, having not studied it. But I'm just looking at the appeal for a Big Sky High School and a Fort Missoula Regional Park right across the street from each other, and it's pretty compelling.
Okay, so I think we are looking for a motion here to support these 3 projects as our TA grant applications, and that would be a recommendation to TPCC.
This is Ellen. I'll make that motion.
I'll second. This is Corey.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I forget how we vote on Zoom, but can we do a voice vote?
Yeah.
All those in favor signal aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so motion carries. Thank you, Charlie and John, for your work on that. We'll keep our fingers crossed that those are successful applications. We don't have any items of old business. Are there any announcements or closing comments today?
I just have one announcement, or I guess just something to put out there that as we move forward in opening up for COVID, as vaccination rates go up and case rates go down, there will likely be and hopefully be an opportunity for more in-person meetings. And so I don't think we're definitely not there yet, but I think potentially later this summer or hopefully by early fall, we may be back to potentially having those in-person meetings. And so I wanted to throw that out there for this committee. I know the city is working on, city council in particular, working on what that will look like and how those meetings will function, and potentially even going to a hybrid model as a sort of first step. And so I know those improvements are moving forward through the city, and that would affect our ability to hold in-person or hybrid meetings as a committee. And so thought I'd put that out there as an update and see if there are general thoughts from this committee members on, are folks really itching to get back to in-person? Do we like the virtual? What are the preferences moving forward for these meetings? I think for June, definitely will be virtual, but then from then on, I think it may be in flux. So that'd be a good opportunity to get ahead of that and see what everyone thinks.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So the city is targeting June 14th as a tentative reopening date that we would go back to having more of these meetings in person. I think there are some benefits to having a hybrid setup. We've certainly benefited from being able to bring our consultants in more frequently. And I think, going forward, we're still going to have folks that are going to be more comfortable in a virtual environment. So certainly a hybrid option is something that I think is important, but as a committee, we may want to decide if we would like to start meeting in person again.
It's been so long, I don't even remember what it was like to meet in person.
Hey, I had an in-person meeting this morning and I got another one this afternoon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, actually.
I did a first in-person presentation yesterday to the Rotary Club, and it felt odd, but also satisfying.
So, I'll tell you my frustration with the Zoom format is it's hard for everyone to be engaged. And we have a committee here that I honestly don't know if folks are engaged or not. So I would like to see more participation on the committee, and I don't know if being in person would help that. But, our job is to really vet these proposals and projects before they go to TPCC for approval. And I think we could do better by getting more folks to speak up at the meeting and provide that input.
I'm in favor of meeting in person again. How quickly we do it, that's open for debate.
Let's see. So I've got Ben and Ellen with their hands up. Ben, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. I want to remind everyone that May is National Bike Month. There's a whole host of rides, not necessarily group rides, but routes that are kind of out there for people to do on their own. Again, trying to be COVID safe. You can find more information at Missoula Motion's website, or I believe there's a Bike Month Missoula Facebook page as well. But there's some bike and bus events, learning how to put your bike on the bus racks. There's some learning how to use the fix-it stations that are around town. I think Free Cycles and Missoula Motion are teaming up for those. There's some bike safety education Zoom calls. There's, like I said, several group rides. And so, yeah, the mayor proclaimed May as Bike Month at this last council meeting, and it's supposed to be 80 degrees today. Great time to get out and start riding.
Oh, Ellen, did you have?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is a bit tangential, but it definitely impacts streets, particularly downtown. River City Roots Festival is going to happen. We did a press release yesterday. I'm trying to fill in some holes in the COVID-related holes in the lineup, and so we're going to have a party on August 27th and 28th downtown. So watch for snarling traffic.
Good deal.
And then I just have one other update that we are doing our bike ped. We're getting back to our volunteer bike ped counts, and so we're doing counts on Saturday and then next Tuesday. And I think we're still in a little bit of a, not everyone is fully returning back to their volunteer levels that maybe we were at pre-COVID. So we do have a few stations open if anyone on this committee or staff in your office would be interested in participating. We could get folks signed up and trained. So to be Saturday from 12 to 2 p.m. And next Tuesday from 4 to 6. So we're excited to get back to that. We took a hiatus from doing the volunteer counts last year due to COVID, but it feels safe enough to have folks outside in areas that are generally not very crowded. So I'm going to try to get back into that program for this spring.
From what you've seen and what you're hearing anecdotally, what kind of impact has COVID had on folks using alternative transportation?
That's a good question. I know our trail last summer in particular, our trail counts were way out. I mean, some of our counters were up by 50 or 60% over the previous year. So I think there was a dramatic increase in use of those facilities. How much of that is for, say, commute trips is sort of hard to say, but hopefully the counts we're getting with our volunteer counts and our automated counters will be able to really get a better picture of that.
And this is more kind of anecdotal feedback, but as we've been doing, taking a more proactive approach to implementing our neighborhood greenways through the neighborhood traffic management program, we're starting to get counts. Even when we're putting out the vehicle counters along some of these routes, we're just observing more people biking. And when we're starting to kind of get off the major streets where we typically do those volunteer counts and spend a little more time and attention on the local streets, we're actually seeing that they're used quite a bit. And so that kind of verifies what we've already known and why we created the Greenway network the way that we did. And we're just doing more data collection and more enhancements of those to try and encourage additional use.
Yeah, I think anecdotally, it seems like there are people, but maybe it's just because we haven't seen a lot of people in daily life for a while that it just feels like any number is a high number. But Ben and I were out on Ivy and Franklin a couple of weeks ago, which is one of our new greenways. It's where we put in some of the quick build traffic calming along Franklin. And it was a steady stream of people walking and biking through there in a place that you wouldn't necessarily expect a lot, but it was consistent, steady bike and ped traffic for close to an hour around the 5 o'clock time. So
yeah, there were as many people using Ivy as using the Bitterroot Trail, it seemed like.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'll put in a plug for Missoula Gives today and tomorrow. Support your local nonprofits. Plug for MTB Missoula. They're doing some really great work around building trails and getting conservation easements for better connectivity in the areas outside of town. Really building a great trail system. So support those guys, support your other favorite nonprofits today and tomorrow. Okay, with that, if there's nothing else, we will be adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. See ya.